2002 through 2009 Toyota 4runner with the 4.0 liter V6 engine alternator replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the alternator. Our first step is to disconnect the negative battery cable. You're also going to want to tuck it out of the way off to the side to make sure it doesn't come back in contact. Next, we're going to remove the drive belt from the alternator. To do that, just below the oil filter housing is the tensioner. So you're going to put a 14mm ratchet or a wrench. I'm using a wrench, and you can put it on the tensioner and you can flex the hose out of your way. Then you're going to rotate the wrench counterclockwise, and that'll release the tension off the belt, and then you can slip the belt off the alternator. Once you get the belt off, the next step is to remove this 10mm bolt here that's holding the wire loom onto the side of the alternator. To do that, I'm using a ratcheting wrench. You can use a regular ratchet or a regular wrench to remove this. After you get that bolt off, you can remove the 10mm bolt holding the positive lead going onto the alternator, and also unplug the electrical connector to the alternator by squeezing the tab and pulling it up. Sometimes it helps by pushing the connector inwards, and then squeeze the tab and then pull up and off. Here is a closer look at the electrical connector going into the alternator. So this is the tab right here that you're going to squeeze and then pull it off. My alternator had a second 10mm bolt holding the wire loom to the side of the alternator. Go ahead and remove that. Once you get that removed, then you can just push the wiring harness off to the side like this and kind of push it downward. Now just slightly left of the alternator is an idler pulley that we need to remove. So you're going to want to remove the 14mm bolt right there and then pull the idler pulley off. Once we get that removed, then we'll have access to the bottom bolt right there and also clearance for the alternator to be removed. To do it, I just used a 14mm wrench and turned the bolt counterclockwise and removed it. You can use a ratchet. The radiator hose here is flexible, so you can flex it out of your way if it's in your way. Once you get the idler pulley removed, the next step is to get to the bottom bolt of the alternator, which is going to be right there. To get that off, I just used a 14mm socket with a little extension and then a regular ratchet. So go ahead and remove the bottom bolt. After that, we can remove the top bolt. I used a slightly longer extension to get to the top bolt here to clear the oil filter housing. Cracked it free, then switched over to my Milwaukee 3/8 drive ratchet here. Makes quick work of jobs like this. So once you get this top bolt removed here, then the alternator is pretty much free from its mounting bracket. And what we're going to do is start trying to work it out of the vehicle. And you can flex the hose here. You can also slightly flex the AC condenser line here and try to work it out. In my case, it was a little big and it was snagging on the wire loom here. So I pulled this little tab, pulled the wire loom off the little mounting bracket here and pushed the wire loom back. That gave me a little bit more room. I went ahead and also removed the terminal from the battery, and that also gave me a little bit more room to push that wiring harness back. If I tried to force it, I probably could get it to clear. It's making a little bit of contact with the battery tray, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and remove the battery. So I'm going to remove the two hold down bolts that hold the battery on. They're held on with 10mm J nuts here. Go ahead and remove those or loosen those up and remove the battery hold down, and go ahead and pull the battery out and set that aside. Once you get the battery removed, you can pull off this lower plastic cover from the battery tray, and now there should be plenty of room to maneuver the alternator out of the vehicle, even if you have to flex the hose a little bit right here. So once you get the alternator out, you want to go ahead and match it up with your new alternator. I always recommend double checking it. I will link this alternator up in the description of the video. That way if you need to pick it up, you can find it there. I will also link up all the tools that I use. Now we're going to take the alternator and slide it back down into position. You want to make sure that the wire electrical connectors are facing upwards when you feed it down into position. So once you get it in the car, the bottom portion of the alternator needs to fit over this little portion right here. So it slides over it like this. So you'll slide it over like this. And then once you get it slid in there, you can rotate it upwards and you can go ahead and start the top bolt, and then you can go ahead and start the bottom bolt. Once you got the two bolts started by hand, then you can run them in. I'm using the ratchet here to run them in until they're snug, and then I'll tighten them both up by hand. So I made sure both of the top and bottom bolts were good and tight by hand. You don't want to over tighten these, but just tighten them up till they're snug and about a quarter turn more. Then we're going to put the idler pulley on. Before I do, I put a little bit of blue thread locker on the threads here on the idler pulley. And that'll prevent this bolt from vibrating loose and coming back off. So go ahead and install some blue thread locker on it. Then you can go ahead and put it back into position, start the bolt, and we'll tighten that down. When I looked in my service manual for the torque spec, it was not listed. So go ahead and just tighten this bolt down. I'm using a ratchet here. So you tighten it down to it's snug and about a quarter turn more. So once you get it tightened, I recommend that you spin it by hand, make sure it spins freely. Just in case your belt fell off or became unrouted, I printed out a diagram here. This is courtesy of ALLDATA. So we're going to slip that belt back on the alternator, and we're going to put the wrench back on the tensioner here, and we're going to rotate it counterclockwise, and that's going to spring the tensioner, and then we're going to slip that belt on over the alternator. Sometimes it's easier to put it underneath the idler pulley here first and then onto the alternator. Once the belt is on, I'm going to double check that it's on all the grooves on all the pulleys. And once I'm satisfied with that, then I'll remove the wrench. Now I'm going to remount the wiring harness to the little bracket here. So I'll slip that on here. Then I'll lift the wiring harness into position next to the alternator and start the two 10mm bolts that were held it on. Now you're ready to plug the alternator in. So you'll plug it into the electrical connector here and then remount the positive lead to the terminal on the alternator and start the bolt and tighten that down. You want to make sure you don't over tighten that, just tighten it down to it's snug. It is made out of brass and it will break off easily. It also may have a plastic cover or rubber cover that goes over it. Go ahead and reinstall that. Next, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the battery tray. So you'll put the battery tray back into position, put the battery in, and then reinstall the hold down. The J-hooks hook into little holes at the bottom here. So once you get those hooked in, then you can tighten the two bolts here. Now you can connect the positive lead. You also want to make sure that all the terminals are clean before you hook this all back up. So if they're dirty or need cleaning, clean those now. And then you can hook the two terminals up and tighten them down. The last step is to start the vehicle and run it. Put a voltmeter on it, make sure that the alternator is putting out and charging. And then double check your work and resecure everything, and that'll complete the job of replacing the alternator. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Also to remind you that I will link up all the parts and tools, and I'll have those in the description of the video. Thank you again for watching.